Welcome! This time on Woodworks, we're going to show you how to build this beautiful wall-mounted display cabinet. Hi, I'm David Marks. Welcome to Woodworks. For the display cabinet that we're going to be making this time, we're going to be using two different types of wood. Cherry for the case and flame maple for the back panel.
The fine grain and the rich red color bring a warmth to the cherry wood case and to the door frame which holds the glass. In contrast, the figured grain of the maple in the back panel shows off a tight curl that has an electric quality to it. The top and bottom add visual weight and give the case an Egyptian feel. They're carved out of thick blocks of cherry, and that's where we'll start this project.
Here's an example of the top of our display cabinet. And this is an example of our cove molding. Now, cove molding is basically just a concave shape cut into the side of a piece of wood. A lot of furniture makers prefer to make their cove molding out of individual strips of wood. But for the sake of efficiency, we decided to combine the cove molding plus the shaping plus the top of the display cabinet in one solid block. Now, this is called a story block. Now, this is nothing more than a series of cuts done on the table saw until we got the profile that we really liked for the top of the display cabinet. What's great about this is basically a step-by-step guide that's going to show us how to make our molding. So on the side, we've written down the numbers, which will tell us the order that we make our cuts in. And on the back, we've written out the description, which is basically going to show us the setups that we need to make on the table saw. Now, this strange-looking setup is actually the fence that we're going to be using to cut out our cove molding. Now, the first time that I was introduced to this, I asked myself, how in the heck are we going to cut across the blade of a table saw diagonally? Well, it turns out that by cutting across the blade diagonally, the arc of the blade is actually going to create the arc of the curve in our cove molding. So we're going to go ahead and use the steps of our story block as a guide to cut out the top and the bottom of our display cabinet out of these massive pieces of 2 3/8 of an inch thick solid cherry stock.
The first step is to cut the cove. We raise the saw blade 1/16 of an inch at a time until we reach the full height. In step 2, a rabbet is cut on each piece, resetting the blade in small increments until the profile is completely cut. For step 3, we set the saw blade at a 30-degree angle and make the first cut of our bevel. And in step 4, we move the blade over to 10 degrees, stand the block against the fence, and we'll finish making our bevel. Next, we'll smooth away the mill marks left from the table saw. For this, we've got a great tool. It's a gooseneck scraper. It's perfect to fit into our cove and scrape down the wood to a nice smooth surface.
Okay, we finished milling the last of the sides for our display cabinet. Now here is an example of the casework for our project. We're going to be using some biscuit joinery to attach the sides to the top and to the bottom. Now over here is the top of our display cabinet that we milled up earlier. Did the shaping on the sides, we made some pencil marks there, we've laid it out so we know exactly where to do our joinery. So we're going to go ahead and position our biscuit cutter exactly on the center lines and go ahead and mill out our slots for the joinery. We've already got our joinery done on the casework, but we don't want to glue it up yet because we need to finish drilling these holes in the sides of the cabinet. Now, it's important that these holes line up so that our glass shelves sit nice and level. But that's not a problem because we got this real simple to use jig that we made. Now, all the spacing's been lined up on the side, and basically the way this thing works is the bottom of the jig references against the bottom of the cabinet. The side of the jig references against the side of the cabinet. That will ensure that all of our reference points remain the same. We put a little bit of double stick tape on the bottom, and that's going to be real helpful too, because it'll just make sure that when we put it on here, it's not going to slip. All right, got all these lined up. Oh, one last thing to remember. We've already set the depth gauge on the drill press, and that's real important because what you don't want to do is end up drilling your hole through the side of the cabinet wall.
Once the holes are drilled, we get the case ready for glue-up. Biscuit joinery is strong enough for the case at this point. It's important that the corners are square so that the back frame and panel will fit in easily later on. And a good fit will make that case even stronger. For more information on making this display cabinet, check out our website at DIYnet.com.
When we return, we'll make a beautiful flame maple panel for our display case.
Welcome back. This time we're building a beautiful wall-mounted display cabinet.
We've already shaped the cove moldings for the case. Now it's time to make the flame maple panel for the back.
We have got a spectacular piece of flame maple for our back panel. Now we're going to resaw this over on the bandsaw. But before we do, the first thing we want to do is get it flat on the jointer. Now, one of the problems with any piece of highly figured wood is it's prone to chipping out. So listen up. Here's a major piece of information that a lot of woodworkers don't know about. What we want to do is send our knives out to a good quality saw sharpening service and ask them to put a back bevel on the knives. And what we're after specifically is a net cutting angle of 10 degrees. Now that is going to tremendously reduce the problem of chipping out.
Remember, by passing the wood slowly over the jointer, we'll get a cleaner cut. And pushing the panel stock over the knives on an angle also helps minimize chip out. Now we resaw the panels to thickness on the bandsaw. Next, we run the pieces for our flame maple panel through the drum sander to get the thickness we want, about 1/4 inch. After making sure the inside edges are jointed, we'll roll out some glue. Lay the matching edges together and clamp it. Now we've got the panel for the back of our display cabinet.
For this particular project, we're going to be making 2 frames. One for the panel that goes into the back of our display cabinet, and another one for the door that's going to hold the glass for our display cabinet. Now we're going to be using a stile and a rail construction. In the joinery, we're going to be making a mortise and a loose tenon construction. Now as a design thing, we've decided to go ahead and add some visual weight. So we're going to make our bottom rail wider than the rail at the top. What this means is we've got to go ahead and make our joinery wider at the bottom than at the top. Now we've got our router table all set up. We've got some stop blocks clamped into place, and that's going to control the length of the mortise cut. We've got our 2-flute carbide router bit there. So let's go ahead and cut the mortise in the bottom rail.
Making the cut in progressive steps, about 1/4 inch at a time, will reduce stress on the bit. We repeat the process on the rails for both the door frame and the panel frame, making adjustments for the different size mortises. For the stiles on both frames, we need to add an auxiliary fence to allow for the extra length. The mortises and the stiles will have to match the appropriate size of the ones we cut in the rails. Next, we use a smaller 2-flute bit, 3/32 of an inch, to cut a dado in the panel frame. This is where we'll insert the flame maple panel later on. On the door frame, we cut a rabbet in the back to house the glass. To take away the sharp edges on the inside of both frames, use an 1/8 inch radius bit to give it a rounded, more friendly feel. When radiusing the stiles, it's important to mark the position for the cut, to make sure we don't run past the points where the stile meets the rails.
This is our tenon stock here. Now we've previously milled it to thickness on the planer, and then we ripped it to width on the table saw. Now what we just did was to use an 1/8 inch radius bit on the router table, and what this did was to just sort of subtly soften and round the edges of our tenon stock. What this is going to do is ensure that it fits the rounded corners of our mortise. See? Now that gives us a good snug fit. Okay, our next step is to go ahead and cut it to length on the table saw.
With the different sized mortises in our two frames, we'll end up making 3 sizes that match the mortises. Now we can glue up the frame for the door. The stiles and rails can be secured by clamping right across the joints.
The glue is dry on our panel that's going to go into the frame for the back of the display cabinet. We're just taking some final passes here with a scraper. And this will get rid of the scratches left by the drum sander. Well, you can really see the depth of the curl of that flame maple coming out. Now let's take this over to the table saw. We'll go ahead and trim this to size. Make sure it fits into our frame. Now we can glue the panel into the frame. We want to be sure to only put glue in the mortises and on the tenons, not in the dado, so the panel has room to expand and contract. This is looking good. We'll give this a couple of hours for the glue to set. And now we'll work on our door frame. We've already had some time for this, for the glue to dry. And next, we're going to route a decorative bead along this inside edge of the door frame. We're going to do that with a handheld router. Now we're ready to go ahead and route the bead along this inside edge. What that's going to do is give us a really nice shadow line. That'll just give you something for your eye to follow. Here's a router with a customized base plate, and we've got a dowel glued in here, which is going to act as a bearing, and that'll travel along the inside edge of the frame and make sure that our V-bit is maintained at 3/16 of an inch. That'll make sure we have a nice, accurate cut.
Next, we finish up the bead with some hand tools. A V-gouge squares up the bead in the corners, and a fine Italian riffler file adds detail to the work.
Coming up next on Woodworks, installing our hinges the easy way.
Welcome back. Our project this time is this wall-mounted display cabinet with cove molding at the top and the bottom.
We made our door and built the frame and panel for the back of the case. Now we're adding glue to the rabbet on the sides of the case, fitting the back in place and making sure it sits in tight.
What we're doing with this crazy looking setup is actually clamping the back panel down into the case of our display cabinet. Now we've got one clamp here to apply some pressure to the top and bottom, and some other clamps on the side that will put some sideways pressure in. But the main thing we want to look at are these 3 cauls. What this is going to do is give us some pressure and really push that panel down into the back of the cabinet. Now the way that we achieve that is by taking these clamps and clamping our cauls down to the work table. This will ensure that we really get the force we need to push this panel down into the rabbet and really seat nice and tight. We're working on the back of the door frame for a display cabinet. And what you really want here is a nice square corner. Now the router bit that we used to go ahead and cut the rabbet left a rounded corner. So what works really well is a good sharp chisel. This will actually make it easy to go ahead and square up that corner. That's looking good. Now we'll go ahead and take the glass and set this into place. And this is a good time to take our measurements for the trim that we're going to be making to hold the glass into the back of the door frame.
First, we cut some cherry stock on the bandsaw, milling the thickness a bit oversized. Then, we put it through the drum sander to clean it up. Next, we cut the pieces to size on the chop saw, making a miter for the corners. And finally, on the drill press, we make the holes for the pins that will hold the trim to the door frame.
We have got some really nice solid brass hinges for attaching our door to our display cabinet. Now by holding it in this position, this gives us a nice positive reference point for laying out our pencil marks. We're going to go ahead and use the plunge router to route out a mortise here, but before we do, it's a good idea to take a good sharp chisel and just go ahead and lay it on those pencil lines and give it a few taps. What that's going to do is give us a scribe line, which will really make it a whole lot easier to see our boundaries when we go ahead and route out our mortise using a plunge router.
We use a 2-flute bit to route out the mortise for the hinges. Then we clean up the cuts with a sharp blade of our chisel. Next, we fit the door into the case and mark the position for the mortises on the door. Again, cut the mortises and finish them up with the chisel.
Coming up next, our display cabinet gets a handcrafted handle and a finish that's warmed by the sun.
Welcome back. Our display cabinet is almost complete.
For more details on making this display cabinet, go to our website at DIYnet.com. We've glued our flame maple back to the case and fit the case and door with hinges. Now we're ready to add the finishing touches.
We're screwing on our solid brass hinges to our display cabinet case. This way we can go ahead and test fit our door to make sure that it's well articulated and opens and closes real nice. Okay. Now, for one of our final touches, we're going to add this solid cherry handle that we've already cut out on the scroll saw. We've cut these curves into the top and bottom of our handle, and this is going to echo the curves of our cove moldings at the top and bottom of our display cabinet. This is really going to add a lot of warmth and beauty to the cabinet. Really give it that sort of handcrafted feel.
After a once-over to check details, we put on a tung oil finish. It will take about 4 coats of tung oil, drying and buffing in between each, to get a good-looking finish.
We're going to set this outside to dry because cherry, exposed to the sun, oxidizes to a beautiful deep red color.
Finally, the glass can be put in the door. We hold the trim in place with brass escutcheon pins.
Okay, we're just setting our last glass shelf into place. And guess what? It sits level. The drill jig worked. We knew it would. So, you know what? It's a great feeling to be at this stage and to see the whole piece come together. It really turned out nicely. Beautiful piece.
The lively grain of the flame maple back panel looks great next to the rich red tones of the cherry, and the elegant large curves at the top and bottom set against the thin lines of the door frame really make this an inviting piece.
One last thing. To hang our display cabinet to the wall, we're going to use this. This is called a French cleat. This is going to screw to the wall, and then our cabinet's going to drop on the back, easy and strong. So that about wraps it up for our display cabinet. I'm David Marks. We'll see you right here next time on Woodworks.